Welcome, my lovely sisters and brothers. Today I will do an extra live book reading, um, and we are continuing with the book, The Story of Isis and the War on Bloodlines, written by Wes Penry. And we are going to dive into the Spencer bloodline, the house of Spencer, which is the house of Lady Diana. So we dive more into her life story as well. So let us continue, and I would highly recommend you to listen to part one and two, who are titled The Windsor Bloodline, part one and two. All right. The Spencer bloodline. Now, while having having addressed the Jewish subject, let us dig into the Diana Spencer bloodline. She had a quite interesting lineage, and there are a few mysteries around Diana in that respect. So let us dive into this storyline. The early life of Diana Spencer. Diana Spencer was born in 1961 to Francis Shand Kidd, who lived from 1936 to 2004, born Frances Ruth Roche, which sounds like a Jewish name very similar to the Rothschild. I have tried to find a Jewish connection in Frances Roche's case, but I have found no Jewish connection to that particular name, except some mentioning of Frances' Jewish connection in a book by Tina Brown called The Diana Chronicles. And here is an excerpt of this book. In her book, The Diana Chronicles, Tina Brown claims that Princess Diana's Jewish mother, Frances Shand Kidd, had relationships with a Jewish banker called James Goldsmith, while she was married to Earl John Spencer. She argues that Diana, who was born in 1961, was the illegitimate child of Goldsmith and was not the real daughter of Spencer. Brown writes that even if Diana is not born to a Jewish father, based on the Jewish law, she is still considered a Jew as she was born to a Jewish mother. I have not read the book, making me unfamiliar with the sources Tina Brown is using for her statement. So the writer of this book, Wes Penry, I cannot confirm or dispute. However, Miss Brown was Princess Diana's friend, which gives some credit to her claims. If her sources are only her verbal communication with Diana, it is, however, difficult to verify her claims. A potential Jewish connection would have given an extra spice to the Diana-Charles marriage, because the Jewish bloodline, as we know, is that of Shem, which in turn is of the Marduk-Isis gene pool. The book can be ordered from Amazon. Others claim that one of the two branches of the Spencer family is Jewish, that these two branches were mingled, and that Diana belonged to both. So here an excerpt. Diana Spencer, the later and late Princess of Wales and international icon, was born into an aristocratic British family, the Spencer family. Interestingly, Diana was also related to the Jewish Spencer family, a prominent and wealthy dynasty of European bankers. The link between the two branches of the Spencer family was established more than 2 centuries ago, when a branch of the Jewish Spencer family emigrated from Germany to England. Since then, the two branches of the Spencer family have continued to share a common heritage, with Diana being a direct descendant of both. So this article will explore the relationship between the Jewish and British branches of the Spencer family, as well as the influence that Diana's Jewish ancestry had on her life and legacy. If this is correct, there is also a German aspect to the Spencer family, which follows the pattern within the British royal family since the early 1700s, when the Marduk branch of the Brotherhood took over and his new bloodline was introduced. The Spencer family has a connection with the British royal family going back a long time and has continued up to this day. It can be traced to the British royal house of Stuart. Through the marriage of Princess Diana's grandparents, John, the seventh Earl Spencer, and Lady Cynthia Hamilton, the Spencer family enjoys a uniquely comprehensive range of descents from the royal house of Stuart that ruled in Scotland from the late 14th century and in all of Britain from 1603 to 1714. In the Diana Chronicles, it apparently says Diana's mother had a sexual relationship on the side with Sir James Goldsmith, the Jewish tycoon who, at his death in 1997, was the richest man in the world. There are many pictures with Diana and Goldsmith being together, and she visited him at the hospital when he was dying from pancreatic cancer in 1997. So Tina Brown claims Diana was his daughter, not Earl Spencer's. The same claim is done at radaronline.com based on what Miss Brown wrote. Prince Charles was also Diana's second cousin, and she was blood related to the current Queen Camilla of Great Britain, King Charles III's queen consort. Another potential clue that it might be the case that Diana was born out of wedlock is that the Spencer bloodline is full of redheads, and Diana's siblings have red hair. Diana's true hair color, however, was neither red or blonde, but auburn, and there are those who have said that she resembled James Goldsmith. Diana is the name for Isis in ancient Rome, as those who have read the West Penry papers might recall. So, like her Greek counterpart, Artemis, Diana was the goddess of hunt, the daughter of the Roman god Jupiter and his mistress, Latona. Artemis is another name for the mother goddess, also known as the Queen Sophia, and Diana/Isis is known as the creatrix of Homo sapiens in the second construct. So it's all the same being together with Enki. Jupiter is the equivalent to both Enki and Marduk because it is a title. It depends on who is holding that title and when. In our time, Jupiter is Marduk. So what does this mean in relation to Diana Spencer? Am I suggesting Diana was Isis? Well, West Benry does. There is overwhelming evidence for this. The closer I come to present time in my research, the easier it is to get more in-depth data and information to compare. So people may have different opinions on the British researcher and writer and lecturer David Icke and his claim that the British royal family and other figures are shape-shifting reptilians. But fact remains that Icke has done some brilliant research over the years. Often he was the first to reveal elite secrets that we now take for granted as holding much truth. Already in 1999, he acknowledged the mother goddess as the feminine creatrix and at the same time spoke on the imbalance of the feminine and masculine forces in humans. He especially pointed out how men suppress their creative feminine side and instead concentrate on boosting testosterone and to be aggressive and competitive in a toxic way, when a balance between the masculine and feminine is needed in all of us. Regarding his shape-shifting reptilian research, it is not as far-fetched and ridiculous as it might sound. I am convinced that the royal families, because of their nurtured bloodlines, make it easy for the overlords to possess them. After all, that is the whole purpose and one of the two reasons why bloodlines have always been so important to the overlords. The other reason is to prove ownership of humankind. I would dare say that those of the purest Marduk Isis Ninurta bloodline and the Marduk Erishkigal lineage are more or less possessed by the overlords and little more than puppets with a destiny. We common people who do not have royal blood in any significant amount cannot be possessed unless we are pure enough. Blood that is too mixed repels. Therefore, we should call ourselves, between quotation marks, lucky, because we are safer in that regard than those of blue blood. I can easily imagine that these beings possessing those in power sometimes bleed through into our frequency band of visible light and can sometimes be seen by those who are sensitive. And that is what I believe Ike essentially tried to say. Are these overhangs reptilian in nature? Yes and no. It depends on how they shape themselves, since they can take any shape and form. Thus the term shape shift. And this term is also coming from the indigenous tribes, such as the so-called Native Americans. Aside from all that, Ike's research on Princess Diana in his book, The Biggest Secret from 1999, is no less than brilliant. He did an amazing job. And now, almost 25 years later, his research still holds water. And it very much coincides with my own research and current findings. I will take the liberty to refer somewhat extensively to that book because it says so much about Diana, her fate, and the powerful occult symbolism around her, which is, as Ike so rightfully points out, Isis symbolism. Diana was very mild-tempered, which seems to be a trait of Isis across most of her incarnations over the millennia. Yes, she is a what is called goddess, a lower aspect of the mother goddess, the queen of the stars of Orion, better known as Orion. But so are we humans. The main difference between humans and Isis is that Isis is older as a soul and a spirit, and she never lived on Tiamat. We have lived on Tiamat. Better known, this piece of land that is called Earth is in actuality a piece of Tiamat. She has more knowledge and wisdom stored than we humans. It is my conclusion that Isis was captured by Enki and Marduk, particularly Marduk, and is held hostage. Her only function is to be a breeder. Diana, like previous incarnations of Isis, was a virgin when she met Prince Charles. So being a virgin seems to be a prerequisite for her missions in her different incarnations. Thus, she, Isis, is the breeder and the incubator. Therefore, she, Isis, is called in the book of Revelation the so-called Whore of Babylon. In the Bible, Isis is both the virgin and the, between quotation marks, whore, the latter denoting she is a breeder. So now we can see how things have been distorted and twisted deliberately. Keep in mind that the Whore of Babylon rides the beast. According to the scripture, a graphic sexual description of Isis riding Marduk-Satan. There is no way for me to get into Isis' head, of course, but putting on my empathy shoes, I can imagine how trapped she has been since she got in touch with Enki and Marduk and became imprisoned by them, as we also are imprisoned by them. All she seems to be doing is to go from one incarnation to incarnation to insert her DNA into the elite royal bloodlines. I am convinced the two malignant conspirators always keep track of her whereabouts, even in the astral realm. So in actuality, she is in the higher regions of the astral realm after she has finished an incarnation. Often it seems like she sometimes also had violent deaths in one way or another in a ritual manner. This is also the case with Princess Diana, more so than people realize. Her entire life was a grand ritual from the beginning to the end. There is no reason to put Isis on a pedestal as some mighty so-called goddess of the universe. She is just like us, albeit she is highly trained in the Orion Sciences. She was also and still is a scientist and a very well geneticist. Particularly genetic engineering and tinkering is her specialty, which she Isis has learned from her cosmic mother, Queen Sophia. I would suggest that her artificial soul was programmed in the astral by the overlords before each incarnation, so she knew what to do and what qualities she had. We also know, according to the New Testament of the Bible, that Isis as the Virgin Mary, also being of a mild nature, was was visited by the so-called Archangel Gabriel, who gave her and Joseph instructions. I cannot almost, or better said, I can almost guarantee that this has happened during most of Isis, her incarnations here on earth. Marduk and Enki steer her in the direction they want her to go. And know that Enki is a deep narcissist and Marduk is a full-blown psychopath. According to some people who knew Diana and whom David Icke interviewed after the murder, claimed that Diana was most likely mind controlled and had a multiple personality. There was a very shy side to herself, reserved and introverted. But she was also in her opposite a socialite and liked to be around people. She could, of course, have been an MK Ultra victim in that lifetime. All right, let us continue with the following, the research of David Icke on Princess Diana. Some of you might have read David Icke's book, The Biggest Secret, but even if so, follow my train of thoughts as we go along. Although much of the following information is based on that book, I expand on Icke's thoughts based on my own research and conclusions. So Diana Frances Spencer was born at Park House on the Queen's Sandringham estate in Norfolk on July the 1st in 1961, the third and youngest daughter of Viscount Althorp, later the 8th Earl Spencer, and his first wife Frances Roche. Her parents separated when she was 6 and divorced in 1969, and her mother married the wallpaper tycoon Peter Shand Kidd. She told Andrew Morton in his book, Diana, Her True Story, the atmosphere was always very strange when we went there, and I used to kick and fight anyone who tried to make us go. We see how interwoven everything is in royal circles, and how inbred the royal families are. People in general know very little about this. There are no coincidences regarding who marries who. It is all decided by the, between quotation marks, royal council. And the marrying couple has little to no say in the matter. It is all about keeping it within the bloodline and to avoid physical and mental consequences of too close inbreeding. The royal families evade marrying their own siblings unless there is no one else to marry, to keep the bloodline clean. Marrying cousins and second cousins is routine, as we can see in Diana's case. She was much closer to the British royal house than people have realized. She grew up on their domain, and she played with the royal children at Park House as a little girl. According to Ike, Prince Charles first saw Diana while he, or better said, while she was still in her pram. At that time, Charles would have been 13, 14 years old. Now we go to the story Diana meets Charles. To get a clearer picture of Diana's ancestry and how Charles and Diana met later, I will continuing quoting from David Icke's book, The Biggest Secret of 1999. The Spencers are an elite bloodline family. They are cousins of the Spencer-Churchills and related to the Marlborough family at Blenheim Palace in Oxfordshire, where Winston Churchill was born. Other forebears included the Duke of Marlborough, Sir Robert Walpole, and the Spencer family inherited a considerable fortune from Sarah, the Duchess of Marlborough. They also married into the Cavendish family, the Dukes of Devonshire, at Chatsworth House, and that offshoot became known as Spencer Cavendish. Diana shared common ancestors with Prince Charles in the third Duke of Devonshire, and most significantly King James the First, the first Stuart King of England and Scotland and sponsor of Francis Bacon. It was King James who played a highly influential role in the expansion of the Brotherhood, the formation of the Virginia Company, which still controls the United States of America, and the creation of the King James Version of the Bible. So Diana was also descended through several lines from the Stuart kings, Charles II and James II, which connected her as with James I to the Merovingian bloodline in France. Charles II had so many children out of wedlock that goodness knows where some of their bloodlines are today. One thing's for sure, the Brotherhood will know. As elite families go, the Spencers are an important bloodline, and Diana was related to countless aristocratic lines, including the Earls of Lucan. Further afield, the Spencers have blood ties with many leading American families, and they are distantly related to the Rockefellers. They have a long history of serving the monarch, and the tradition continued with Diana's father. He was equerry to King George VI, who was married to the Queen Mother and to Queen Elizabeth. Diana's sister, Jane, is married to Sir Robert Fallows, the Queen's private secretary at the time of Diana's death. Both of Diana's grandmothers, the Countess Spencer and Ruth Lady Fermoy, were inner circle members of the Queen Mother's court, as were four of her great aunts. So the Spencers and the Queen Mother were very close, and it was Lady Fermoy and the Queen Mother who manipulated Diana into her marriage with Prince Charles. This could be most significant when you hear about the true nature of the Queen Mother. The countdown to the marriage began when Diana met Prince Charles at Althorp while he was having a relationship with her sister Sarah. In 1977, Diana was 16 years old, but it was 3 years later that the Windsors really made their move on her, with the Queen Mother and Lady Fermoy manipulating behind the scenes. She was invited to a dance at Buckingham Palace to celebrate Charles' 30th birthday. Then in July 1980, a friend of Charles, Philip the Pass, asked her to stay with them while the prince was there. So the Spencers' relation to the Rockefeller family and apparently to the Rothschilds as well certainly make them Jewish. According to Ike, the old Queen Mother, Elizabeth Bowes Lyon, was deeply involved in occultism and what is commonly called Satanism, something that should not come as a surprise. These occult and sometimes gruesome rituals were commonly practiced already among the Merovingians. It appears it was she and Diana's maternal grandmother, Lady Fermoy, who gave the orders to Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, who passed the news to Prince Charles that Charles and Diana should marry, because the Queen Mother ran the show in the royal family with Prince Philip second in charge. The Queen Mother's word was law. Although Charles later said that she got interested in Diana when she was 16 because he found her attractive, charming, and adorable. He was very much against marrying her. His consort of choice was, as we know, Camilla Parker Bowles. But Charles had no say in the matter. When Diana had been officially chosen among the royals, there was no way to stop this. This was most likely extremely frustrating to Charles. But perhaps they calmed him down by saying that all the royal family needed was for Diana to bring him heirs to the throne. Once that was done, Diana could be discarded and eventually murdered, and Charles could marry Camilla to the royal family. So Princess Diana was just a breeder and an incubator. This is a hypothesis I have had for a little while, and interestingly, I found the following in David Icke's book, too. In this, here an excerpt of this book. The Windsors wanted Diana to produce heirs with Spencer genes, and that was all she was to them, an incubator. A week after her engagement to Charles, her bulimia began. This is an eating disorder in which you make yourself sick every time you eat food. Diana was throwing up 3 or 4 times a day and became desperately thin. As I mentioned in an earlier chapter, Many victims of childhood sexual and satanic abuse suffer from bulimia later in life. She said that the bulimia was triggered when Charles put his hand on her waist and said, "Oh, a bit chubby here, aren't we?" Bulimia is a disease of the emotions, as most diseases are, and Diana was in emotional turmoil even before the wedding. She described the attitude of Charles like this: "He'd found the Virgin, the sacrificial lamb, and in a way he was obsessed with me. But it was hot and cold, push and pull. You can never knew what mood it was going to be. Up and down, up and down. He was in awe of his mama, intimidated by his father, and I was always the third person in the room." I noticed the last couple of days when reading Ike's chapter on Diana that his research, which includes extensive interviews with friends and relatives to the princess, what he wrote corresponds well to what has been conveyed in this book, not only regarding Diana but also regarding bloodlines in general. Except this book goes deeper into the bloodline issues, following Isis and to some extent Ereshkigal through the last few millennia. But why did the Queen Mother and between brackets Marduk want Diana/Isis to add the Spencer bloodline to the existing British royal blood? I think the answer is quite simple. As we discussed earlier, the German invasion happened in the early 18th century, and since then the Marduk-Ereshkigal bloodline was inserted into the existing bloodline through Sophia of Hanover, the potential Ereshkigal and Marduk. This is now roughly 300 years ago, and during this time, the bloodline has been severely diluted. By that I mean the Ninurta blood running through the veins of the royals has become less and less for each generation. Enki's and Marduk's blood was always of great importance to the two overlords, but most important of all was the Ninurta blood, which could and would strengthen their position in Orion. Without it, the overlords would be powerless. Marduk knew, of course, that even though he wanted to take over, his new bloodline cannot be too watered down, or he loses his opportunity to take on Orion. He needed fresh blood, particularly this close to the singularity. Hence, it was time for Isis to make another trip to Earth from the astral and be used as a breeder again, adding the Isis Ninurta blood to the existing royal genealogy because of the new Marduk-Ereshkigal bloodline, which was inserted 300 years ago. Marduk would still have the upper hand over Enki, having more of his DNA running through the monarchy veins than Enki. The Spencer family had and still has a stronger and purer bloodline than the Windsors. The princess was also a descendant of the British King James II, and further back to the Merovingians. Diana died at the age of 36, but she completed her mission and was then, between quotation marks, called back to the astral. Isis is the goddess of love and war, but also known in ancient texts to be a healer. Therefore, I found it synchronistic to find the following in David Icke's book. Here a short excerpt. She was unfortunate in her love affairs because she rescued others in her own distress. So the men she went for were all emotional cripples because she was a healer too. Um, okay. Diana's life with Charles and her untimely death. Diana was very unhappy in her marriage and living with the Windsors in general. She considered them anything but nice people. It was reported that she even called them evil lizards. She confined with friends during her years with Charles that he made her feel inadequate in all possible ways, and each time she came up for air, he pushed her down again. She hated herself so much, which were her own words, and where have we heard such dynamics being played out before? In narcissistic relationships, of course. Hot, cold, hot, cold. Push, pull, because that's what narcissists are doing. They are pulling you and then pushing you away. So this is this hot and cold. Making their target hate themselves and lose all self-respect. This tells us what we need to know about Charles, as if we didn't know already. Ike continues. Then, suddenly, as Harry was born, it just went bang. Our marriage, the whole thing went down the drain. She told Andrew Morton. Diana and Charles separated in 1992 and divorced on August 28th, 1996. Almost exactly a year later, she was dead. Ike was darn right about this. The goddess Isis had done her duty, and Charles could attend to Camilla more intensely as he probably had been promised. Diana was then sacrificed in the most occult and horrific manner. Ike makes a compelling and very believable case of Diana's death, and in following the symbolism and the timeline from her Paris visit until the car slamming into the 30th pillar, near and below the temple of Diana/Isis. Just minutes away from the palace, Jacques Molay, the Grand Master of the Knights Templar, was burned at the stake. The evidence Ike presents is compelling and unmistaken. Diana survived the crash, but the conspirators made sure she would not, for any reason, leave the crash site, and the tunnel until she was pronounced dead on the site. From an esoteric perspective, she must die in the tunnel, not outside. That was very important. She was supposed to die right away, but didn't. Therefore, they must let her bleed to death before they could move her body. Otherwise, the occult ritual would fail because Diana would not have died at that designated place. There are whistleblowers who knew Diana, arguing that she was 3 months pregnant when she died, but of course not with Charles. Obviously, this would not be allowed since this would strengthen another elite bloodline, although diluted, that of Dodi. When the ambulance came after more than an hour after the crash, they took her to the hospital, but know that this hospital was already on purpose delaying this ambulance because the hospital staff was already part in this whole sacrificial ritual. So they deliberately did not took the nearest hospital, of course not, which was fully capable to operating on her, but to a hospital much, much farther away, where an appointed team of doctors met them and took care of Diana's body. Of course, this team of doctors was already chosen. They claimed she was alive, although she was announced dead on sight, and they supposedly started operating on her. They split her up from the pelvis and all the way to her chest, even though Diana was already dead, removing the fetus. I think there is no chance Diana was alive when she arrived at the hospital. She died in the tunnel from bleeding out. At the memorial site for Diana and Dodi, there is a note that the wine glass Diana drank from in the hotel just before the death rite showed their love and devotion to each other. Oh, really? A simple wine glass shows how much Dodi and Diana were in love? What a silly thing to say. But of all things, isn't it strange they put a wine glass inside a pyramid? The wine is symbolism for blood. Glass is symbolism for a cup, represents the Holy Grail. And the pyramid represents Egypt, which is ISIS' original country on earth. Not only that, but the pyramid was also very important in the death and sacrifice of Diana. So read on and I will explain. There's no evidence, but Ike speculates from the time after the fetus was removed, and in standard brotherhood manner, it was eaten by its high-ranking members in a grotesque occult ritual. If true, it would not have been the first time such a thing happened in the occult world. I recommend the reader to study the chapter about Diana in Ike's book for much more information and details, and I think you will see that he is not making all this up. As I mentioned, the evidence for his case is compelling. All right. I continue further to the last few pages, and then we have come to the end of chapter 12. A very interesting chapter 12, I must say. So to me, there is no doubt Diana was Isis. Even all the symbolism in her life points to that, and it was well known in certain circles. All this occult effort was not done because she was just a somebody. It was done because Marduk sacrificed the real Isis, and they, between quotation marks, ate her soul, i.e., stole her energy in the death moment. Regarding her unborn baby, they might have drunk its blood and eaten its flesh. If this is true, I think it was urgent that Diana got to the correct hospital as soon as possible after she was pronounced dead. The blood is more potent the closer it is consumed after death. Now, how about this? According to the Illuminati website run by Robert Anton Wilson, a friend of David Icke's and a Montauk mind control survivor, states on his website that after the divorce from Charles, the elite wanted Diana to marry Bill Clinton, but she refused, partly because Clinton was already married. That was apparently no problem to those behind the scenes. According to the movers and shakers, it was just a matter of giving slick Killer Bill with a Willie a divorce, or maybe even assassinating Hillary. I do not know who was suggesting such a thing on a deeper level, as it seems to benefit neither side in the bloodline conflict, Isis or Marduk and Ereshkigal. The point is, however, that it never happened. Stunningly, Diana wrote this letter before she was assassinated. Diana wrote the following: My husband, Charles, is planning an accident in my car, brake failure, and serious head injury. So she was ritually murdered by the royal family. So it seems obvious that Diana knew about the plot beforehand, but probably felt helpless preventing it, not knowing when it was going to happen. The royal family found out Diana was pregnant and they did not want her pure blood to be mixed with Egyptian blood, which would make the Egyptian dynasty more powerful. Therefore, it seemed like a good idea to kill Dodi, Diana, and her baby in one go. And they got rid of that problem. He who controls Diana controls the world, as Wilson says on his website, with Diana as Isis. I would agree that is correct. Diana's baby with Dodi and the urge for Charles to marry Camilla are certainly two motives for having Diana killed. However, I doubt the ritual murders were planned by the royal family. So Robert Anton Wilson points out in a video on his Illuminati website what the word monarch means on a deeper level, which directly attunes to what we are discussing. Monarch can be divided into two words, moon and arc, denoting the arc of the crescent moon, which is the symbol of Isis, the moon goddess, but is in the extension also a symbol for the ancient Druids, with Sir Winston Churchill as a member, dedicated to pagan, animal, and human ritualistic sacrifices to the so-called gods. This is practiced just as frequently today as it was in Druidic times. And as I have said elsewhere, the Germans were supposed to be sacrificed together with the Jews in Nazi Germany, so the gods could have a massive feast on human soul energy in quotation marks Valhalla, comma, the whole of the gods. Virtually all secret societies use the skull and crossbones as one of their symbols, representing death and sacrifice. We also see Mary Magdalene in paintings with the skull in her hand or besides her. Jesus, his skull. Well, I told you the painters were initiated. Jesus, portrayed as the ultimate sacrifice, died on a cross on Golgotha, the place of the skull. Diana also sacrificed, died at Pont de la Alma, an old sacrificial site, and she died on top of a pyramid intentionally shaped in the road structure and at a crossroads where heaven and hell meet, according to occult knowledge. Thus we have the wine glass inside a pyramid on Diana's and Dodi's memorial site. If people only know when they visit these sites. Instead, they think it is very compassionate and considerate to put up these memorial sites, when indeed it is a way of keeping the murderous energy anchored on earth. And we have a lot of these memorial sites. So people need to realize that if you visit memorial sites, what you in actuality do is participating in keeping the energetic lines of the murder still connected to earth, and showing the agenda in plain sight in the form of symbols. So the same thing happened to JFK, who was killed at Dealey Plaza, which has the shape of a pyramid. Everything is extremely well planned to best please the gods and get as much soul energy out of the murders as possible. And knowing this, then you can know that each and every murder done in this world, if it is wars, school shootings, or whatever, it is all planned. Nothing in this construct called Earth is at random done. Nothing. As of this writing, it is 24 years and 2 months since Diana was sacrificed. And if she incarnated again closely after her death, she would be 23 to 24 years old now. And we do not know where in the world she might be or if she is still in the astral. But it might be a good idea to keep our eyes open. Now we know her nature better and under which circumstances she incarnates. Usually it is when a bloodline somewhere needs to be announced with Ninurta's blood. This doesn't happen often these days because Marduk has other plans, comma, including his new bloodline. Between brackets, I will eventually end this chapter, however, with a plausible explanation why they used Isis/Diana to boost the British royal family bloodline. If we see a big change in a royal bloodline somewhere in the world, we may suspect to see Isis or Ereshkigal there, respectively, depending on the circumstances. Unfortunately, Isis is just as trapped as you and I are. But we at least have the opportunity to leave the matrix after this lifetime by exiting through the grid. Isis might not. I am sure Orion knows what is going on with her, and so does Ninurta. So I suspect, but she is kept hostage by the overlords, so it is a delicate matter for Orion to rescue her if that is one of their plans. Isis worship amid Paris. All right. Um, so far, we have loosely followed David Icke's line of research. Let us end the history of the British royal family and that of Princess Diana with some occult significance to Paris and why they chose Paris as the death site for Princess Di. It was almost certainly because Paris is a massive occult center for Isis and Isis worship. It goes back all the way to the Merovingians who worshipped Isis as Mary Magdalene. Um, I'm going a bit further due to time thing. Yeah, okay. So I'll still do a bit. To start with, the name Paris has two origins, the official and the unofficial. So the latter suggests the name comes from Bar Isis, the boat of Isis, because the first representation of the Dark Lady would have arrived on a ship going up the Seine to the Isle de la Cité or Ile de la Cité. This would explain why the coat of arms of the city has a boat in its arms. This is, of course, not the official explanation, but as the reader has noticed while reading this book, we have been lied to repeatedly. Paris has at least two stories. For example, here is the connection between the Merovingian kings, Paris and Isis worship. The old charters of Saint Genevieve and Saint Germain, Saint Germain de Prés mention it. They say that Clovis and Childebert, their founders, assigned them the remains of Isis and its temple. It is often significant. It is often signified, in the oldest chronicles of the capital, that Isis, mistress of the esoteric doctrine and of all the arts of magic, was venerated in Paris, either first in the island of the city itself on the site of Notre Dame. So this should question mark also the story behind the Notre Dame, Why is it that they have blown up the Notre Dame? Because the Notre Dame was, of course, not just like that in fire. That was a planned event. Or on the site where the Abbey of Saint Germain de Prés was subsequently built. Clovis and Childebert were both Merovingian kings. Moreover, the monk abbot of the cloister at Notre Dame considers Isis as the first protectress of Parisians in a poem written in the ninth century on the siege of the city by the Normans. The official story of Paris and its history is conveniently removed from the school books and history books, occluding the fact that the entire city of Paris, since ancient time, is closely related to the Merovingian Mary Magdalene / Isis worship. There is also no doubt Paris has a history of Egyptian deity worship, the land whence Isis originally came. We see the great Egyptian obelisk in Paris, and there are 4 pyramids built in front of the royal palaces in the central Napoleon courtyard. Moreover, the Americans gave Paris a Statue of Liberty to commemorate the centennial of the French Revolution. Of course, the founding fathers and the American and French revolutions were all about the bloodline moving west, and another branch of the Brotherhood in France being eradicated. The Statue of Liberty symbolizes Goddess Diana / Isis with a flaming torch, the fire of the Mother Goddess, her creative ability to give birth to Jesus and to maintain the bloodline. All right. Um, then as last a little bit, yeah. Um, who killed Diana? The question still lingers, who killed Princess Diana? There is hardly any doubt she was killed. Was it Prince Charles? Was it a royal family conspiracy? As usual, we need to ask ourselves who benefits. Well, many people behind the scenes benefited. Prince Charles certainly did. And Diana suspected him of wanting to kill her. But so did Marduk. It could be either or, so we must follow our intuition. Although Charles benefited from the murder, my intention tells me, and my intuition, better said, tells me it was not he who ordered the murder. Marduk would benefit more, particularly when it became known that she was pregnant, possibly to further spread the Orion blood. She must be killed, and Marduk was most likely furious with her for interfering with his plans when she gave birth to William and Harry. So he wanted to get as much as possible out of the murder and orchestrated a complex occult ritual around it, which also could feed him loose from Isis and make her suffer, also showing her who is running the show. To me, it is more likely it was Marduk's minions, possibly from the CIA or the Mossad. And then as last, uh, Queen Elizabeth II as a mother goddess representative. So my Orion source pointed out to me that Queen Elizabeth thought she was the mother goddess representative on earth with the divine right to rule, which he added was of course completely erroneous. She had no permission from Orion to do so. Also, he said Elizabeth was not even royal anymore. Her blood was that of a commoner these days. She was still alive when he told me this. There was no royal blood left in her veins. What he meant by this, although I didn't understand it at that time, was that her blood was that of the Marduk Rishgagal, and that has nothing to do with Orion itself. Barely any Orion royal blood there. However, behind the scenes, the British royal family is not supporting Marduk. They are supporting Isis and the divine feminine. My contact also said that Marduk had tried many times to make deals with the British royalty and even tried to conquer England on several locations, but always failed, and they threw him out, as he put it, because they did not need him. As I have mentioned a few times, the Windsors are mother goddess worshippers. The Queen of England was well aware of their dire bloodline condition after being infiltrated by the German stock in the 19th century. Royals back then, in general, probably had no idea what Marduk's overall plan was, and that there was a greater plan behind the German invasion of their bloodline. I do not think Elizabeth knew about Marduk's final solution, either, i.e., to attack Orion, because that is his main plan. But she knew her bloodline was diluted and it needed a severe boost of Orion blood. She knew she couldn't get it. Her children couldn't get it, but her grandchildren could. Therefore, the Windsors once more took help from Germany, maybe for the last time, via Prince Philip, who through his connection apparently knew where Isis was. He married Elizabeth and they had children who were almost completely void of royal blood, including Charles, although Philip had some of it. However, it didn't matter. When Elizabeth and Philip both understood what they needed to do, they did what needed to be done. It was all about the future of the divine feminine bloodline. It was Queen Elizabeth's mother, the royal matriarch, who suggested Charles should marry Diana against Charles's wish. She also had the support of Prince Philip. Charles was afraid of his father, and when Philip forced Charles to marry Diana, he had little choice but to obey. As I suggested earlier, I think Charles was promised to marry Camilla after Diana had given him heirs. Philip knew who Diana was. Diana slash Isis most likely knew what she was doing because this intermarriage with Charles would benefit her too. When Diana gave birth to William with Charles, and Harry perhaps with James Hewitt. The resemblance is stunning. I think she put her eggs in two baskets instead of one. No pun intended. If one plan failed, the other might not. Whatever the case, both William and Harry married women of the bloodline. Kate Middleton has aristocratic blood through her forefather, and Meghan has royal blood too, according to the New England Historic Genealogy, Genealogy Society. Going back in straight line all the way to King Edward III, this means that all William's children are of full Marduk-Isis bloodline. Harry, depending on who his father is, has a similar situation. His children are also pure bloodline. Thus, the Orion bloodline is re-established in the House of Windsor. This of course benefits the British family, but perhaps also Isis, who can use this bloodline to exit the Matrix when it is getting too hot here. She can return to Orion by riding humans of her bloodline and take some humans with her. This is, of course, just a hypothesis. Either way, with Ereshkigal having taken Isis' place as the breeder and incubator. I am sure Isis was eager to take on the task as Diana Spencer to disrupt the satanic Marduk-Ereshkigal line and re-establish her Isis Ninurta goddess bloodline. Although Charles probably couldn't care less, his mother and father were stricter with their religion, both being Mother Goddess worshippers. Prince Philip also became a Master Mason of the Grand Lodge of Freemasonry in England, which is very significant, which we shall see soon. All right. With this said, I have come to the end of this chapter 12, all about the English royal house. And it was a very interesting chapter, and I highly recommend you to also go through part 1 and 2. All right, thank you so much for tuning in through Facebook, Rumble, and YouTube, and for listening along. I wish you all a beautiful day filled with a lot of love, joy, wisdom, and revelations, all coming from your own spirit. And as last, I do a short piece of music titled Hope. If I can, yeah. So see you next time.